So let's choose the best stocks from the next sector, and let's do the finance sector. Now, the finance sector is made up mainly of banks, which is pretty obvious, but also other financial companies that deal with things like insurance, mortgages, things like that. But also exchange traded funds, real estate investment trusts, they all belong in this category as well. So for that reason, I thought we'd do the 3 best individual companies and the 3 best exchange traded funds or other sort of trusts or funds that fit into this category. We're looking at both dividends and how much the fund or the company has increased over the past 5 years. So let's jump on the computer and we'll have a look at the research, and I'll show you also how I've come up with the 3 that I've picked as individual companies and the 3 that I've picked as exchange traded funds. First, I'm going to grab all the companies within the financial sector that have a market capitalisation of over 1 billion. There's 445 companies within the financial sector, and there's a lot more that are actually valued over 1 billion than there is in other sectors. So there's going to be a lot more to work with and to research. So let's grab that and I'll put it into a spreadsheet. So here's all the companies. I've already filled in all of the dividend yield, the dividend consistency, the 5-year return, and the return on equity. I have not included debt to equity in this category because most of the finance companies within this category don't have a debt to equity because they're the ones lending the money and not borrowing the money. But the banks, a lot of the finance companies, and of course the ETFs don't have debt to equity. So I've just eliminated it for this sector. Let's start with individual companies. When I'm choosing companies, I eliminate all of those companies that don't fit the criteria first. So first, I'm going to eliminate all of those companies over the last 5 years that haven't returned anything above the ASX 200. ASX 200 over the past 5 years has increased just above 20%, 20.88%. Next, I'm going to eliminate those that the dividends are not consistent because we're not interested in a company that doesn't pay consistent dividends. And finally, I'm going to eliminate any company that has a return on equity less than 10%. Now, this is not a hard and fast rule. Sometimes I might go lower, sometimes I might go higher, depends on the companies within the sector. But for the finance sector, around 10% return on equity is pretty good. So we might as well just list the ones from highest dividend yield to lowest, which means Commonwealth Bank is number 1, Macquarie Group number 2, and ASX, which is the ASX as a whole, ASX Limited is number 3. So first is Commonwealth Bank with a dividend yield of 3.8%. It's 100% franked. 5-year return has increased over 34%, and the return on equity is 11.6%. They pay the dividends in March and September. The dividends have been nice and consistent. They did drop in 2020 as all banks did during that time, but they're increasing again. Macquarie Group, dividend yield of 3.5%. It's only 40% franked, so keep that in mind. But over the last 5 years, it has returned over 79%, and the return on equity is really healthy at 15%. They pay dividends in July and December, and the dividends up until 2020, like most of the financial sector, did drop in 2020, but it's back to being normal as usual. The ASX Limited, it has a dividend yield of 3.3%. It's 100% franked. They pay their dividends in March and September. Dividends are nice and consistent, increased over 28% over the last 5 years. While it has been quite volatile over the past 5 years, as the stock market has been overall, the chart usually follows what the stock market is doing, but it has increased. Now let's talk briefly about exchange traded funds before we choose the top 3, mostly because choosing an exchange traded fund, you do so for a specific reason usually. When you're choosing exchange traded funds, you're usually choosing either an index fund because you want to have the whole market, you want to diversify your portfolio easily, or you're looking for a specific exchange traded fund. So perhaps you're looking for only high dividend stocks or only companies within a certain sector. And while you're still looking for things like good dividends, if that's what you're after, or you're looking for good returns, obviously, you tend to choose individual companies and exchange traded funds for different reasons. So let's jump in and we'll have a look at 3 exchange traded funds. One is a general index one that I think is really good, but the other 2 are kind of specialized. So it really depends on what you're looking for. But let's jump in anyway and see which ones I've picked. Now for the index fund, I've chosen A200, which is Beta Shares Australia 200 ETF. It has a dividend yield of 6.6% and a 5-year return of over 21%. And management fees are fairly good at 0.07%. You don't expect management fees on an index fund to be very high. The reason I chose it over VAS, which is Vanguard's Australian Share Index, even though VAS currently has a higher dividend yield, it didn't increase as much over the last 5 years, and the management fees are slightly higher. So for that reason, I went with A200 for just a general index fund. The next 2 exchange traded funds are very similar. They're both from Vanguard. One deals with international shares, so we'll look at that one first, and the other one deals with US only shares. So let's look at VGS first, which is Vanguard's international shares. It's another index fund, and it holds the world's largest companies, including both US and the rest of the world, but it doesn't include any Australian companies. It has a dividend yield of 1.8%, a 5-year return of over 45%, and management fees are starting to get a little bit high at 0.18%. So it does reinvest most of the dividends, even though you do get some of them back. Now, VTS is the other one, the other international ETF. This one only deals with the US market though, and it currently tracks the CRSP total market for the US, and it holds over 4,000 companies. Its management fees are significantly lower at 0.03%. Dividend yield's about the same, 1.3%, because it does reinvest a lot of the dividends. And the 5-year return has been amazing, over 71% over the last 5 years. The last two exchange traded funds are very similar. It really depends whether you want a complete international package or just to deal with US stocks. That's a personal preference. So that was the finance sector of the Australian Stock Exchange. There was a lot of companies in this sector, so it was hard narrowing everything down, but I hope you've agreed with my choices, and if not, that's fine too. You can go and do your own research, but I hope that this has helped you anyway. Anyway, happy investing, and I'll see you in the next video. And I'll try and get through the sectors a lot faster because I've been kind of slacking.